Okay. It's good to see everyone tonight. Shana Tova and Gemar Chatima Tova. The topic for this Drasha is, as the title says, why doctors go to Gehenna and what that means for the rest of us. And the idea that doctors go to Gehenna isn't my idea. It's based off a Mishnah that appears in Masechet Kedushin, in the Gemara, in the Talmud. So let's start with that very striking Mishnah, and then together, hopefully, we can uncode the meaning of those words and what it could, why it is that doctors, it seems from this, are destined for Gehenna, which is not where we think probably doctors would go, seeing as with all the good that they do in the world. And of course, coming now from being part of a family that has many doctors in it. It's not just Chaya that's a doctor. My father-in-law is a doctor. A brother-in-law is a doctor. Two of my sister-in-laws are doctors. Chaya's giving me signals in the background. So this is a perplexing Mishnah that begs some deeper discussion. Okay, so it says, Rebbe Yehuda says in his name, quoting another Tana, most donkey drivers are wicked since they engage in deceit. Apparently that was sort of part of the trade of being a donkey driver. There are all sorts of professions today we might think in their very nature are in some ways deceitful. In the times of the Mishnah, it was being a donkey driver. Most camel drivers who traverse dangerous places, such as deserts, are a fit character as they pray to God to protect them in their journeys. So because they're engaged in a dangerous profession, they tend to be very pious. Most sailors are pious since the great danger of the seas instills in them a fear of heaven. So according to the rabbis, the Mishnah, the more dangerous your profession is, the more likely you are to be observant and pious because you count on God to protect you. And then the Mishnah says, Tov sheberofim leGehenna, that the best of doctors, not all doctors, only the good doctors, go to Gehenna. And it concludes, even the fittest of butchers is a partner of a Malek. So that's the phrase I want to focus on, Tov sheberofim leGehenna, that the best of doctors go to Gehenna. Let's see how the Rishonim, the rabbis of the Middle Ages, dealt with it, and the commentators on the Talmud explained this phrase and what it was speaking about. So Rashi explains it in this way. He says the best doctors go to Gehenna. So why is it that they go to Gehenna? According to Rashi, he lists 5 different reasons for why they go to Gehenna. He says, one is they don't fear disease. They eat the food of the healthy. They do not act humbly before God. Sometimes they kill people, and sometimes they're able to heal a poor person, but they do not do so, apparently because a poor person can't pay them, so they refrain from healing that person. The first 3 traits here that Rashi lists are hard to understand exactly what they have to do necessarily with being a doctor. In particular, it could be that because they're confident in the face of disease, they don't fear disease. I'm not quite sure what it means that they eat the food of the healthy. And again, maybe the fact that they don't act humbly before God, maybe that comes from a sort of sense of arrogance that they know how to overcome nature. I really want to focus on the last 2 explanations that Rashi gives. That sometimes they kill, and sometimes they're able to heal a poor person, but they do not do so. And this is strange because they seem to contradict one another. Sometimes Rashi is saying doctors go to Gehenna both because sometimes they inadvertently kill people, and also because they don't intervene when they should. So they're sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't, if they don't, if you will. Because if they intervene, they might cause someone to die. If they don't intervene, then Rashi is saying that's also a reason why they would go to Gehenna. I forgot that before I dived into this, I did want to tell one story. And that was that I was in New York at my previous congregation once, and a Hasidic Rebbe came from Israel to speak at the shul to raise some funds, and he quoted this Mishnah. And the shul I was at happened to be very close to Mount Sinai Hospital on the Upper East Side. It had a lot of doctors in it. And when the Rebbe quoted this Mishnah, immediately someone replied, the reason why doctors go to Gehenna, and the person said it in Yiddish, he said, the reason why doctors go to Gehenna is because that's where the patients are. So because we're all so difficult and we go to Gehenna, that's why this doctor said doctors go to Gehenna. So we're going to suggest another reason why this mission applies to us, but that's one version of this I heard. Anyway, let's keep going with what Rashi says. So Rashi leaves us, I think, with at the very end with two sort of contradictory suggestions. They go to Gehenna because they intervene, and they go to Gehenna because they don't intervene. And this idea also is found in another one of the medieval commentators, the Meiri. And he says something similar. He says, for often they shed blood because they give up and do not try to apply their trade as physicians appropriately. So sometimes they don't intervene and they give up on a patient. They don't take care of them, and that's why they're going to be punished by going to Gehenna. And at other times, they do not know the etiology of the disease. They don't know anything about the disease that's in front of them and how it should be treated, and yet they pretend as if they do. So again, they go to Gehenna because they don't intervene, and they go to Gehenna because they intervene. So which is it? Why is it? Because they are, let's say, too aggressive or not aggressive enough? Well, to answer that question, and I think what Rashi and the Meiri are both perhaps suggesting, and others, let's take a look in the Ramban. So the Ramban zeroes in, not in his Perush on the Gemara, but in another one of his works. He discusses this phrase, and he explains what he thinks it means. So if we scroll down, so the Ramban writes that medical interventions as a whole are nothing but danger. And it's sort of clear that the Ramban, who lived in Spain, is known for is known both for his Perush on the Gemara as well as his Perush on the Chumash, his commentary on the Torah. And his commentary on the Torah also alludes to all sorts of mystical explanations. It's clear that he was knowledgeable in mysticism, perhaps had some knowledge of Kabbalah or sort of proto-Kabbalah. So he clearly, we know from a number of different places, was suspicious of doctors and of medicine. So he writes, medical interventions are nothing but a danger. What heals one person kills another. And this is what is meant when they said, with the Mishnah we just read, the best doctors go to hell. To disparage the practice, and that Mishnah is meant to disparage the practice of physicians and their malpractice. But then he continues, there's no concern that this matter of medicine is totally prohibited. Rather, it is permitted for one who is an expert and knowledgeable in this theory and practice, and where there's none greater than him. However, all that are not knowledgeable in this practice should not engage in it. And similarly, if there is one greater than him, presumably where he lives, he should not engage in it. And if he does so, he is a shedder of blood and will certainly go to Gehenna. So according to Ramban, this Mishnah was speaking about people perhaps who think that they're good doctors, but in fact, they're not quite as skilled as they think they are. And that if they looked around their town or their city, they would find that there was one more superior to that. And that anyone who practices medicine, who tries to heal people, when there's one who's superior to them in their city, they are considered a murderer, and they are destined for Gehenna. And this idea that there are some people who are practicing medicine who shouldn't be, and that they're going to be chayav, they're going to be liable for what they do, and there are others who are practicing medicine who won't be liable for what happens, actually has a long history. So if we look back in the Tosefta, and the Tosefta contains the Braitot. These are rabbinic teachings from the same period of the Mishnah, so from sometime from the year the beginning of the Common Era to the year 200. So this was written at the same time that the teaching from Rebbe Yehuda that we read was written. The Tosefta, the Breita here, that's in the Tosefta, describes a number of professions where people might injure another person or might do something wrong. And under normal circumstances, they would be liable to pay that person damages. But because they're operating with the permission of the Beit Din, with the permission of the court, they are not held liable for the damages they cause. And one of the professions that the Breita lists is that of a doctor. So the Breita says in the middle that a skilled doctor who works with the permission of the Beit Din, sort of a, let's say in our terms, a licensed professional, if he accidentally injures someone, he is exempt from paying them damages. But if he purposely caused them damages, if he purposely hurt someone, then he obviously is liable. He has to pay damages. And this rule is because tikkun ha'olam. So when the Mishnah and the Gemara use the phrase tikkun ha'olam, they mean certain rabbinic enactments that were designed to help the world sort of work better and work in a smoother fashion. If you had a case where the Beit Din empowered a person to act in their capacity, whether it's to enforce the law or to be a doctor, but then and in the course of carrying out their professional responsibilities that the Beit Din had charged them with, had given them, they were held liable for damage they caused. No one would want to go into those professions, and the world sort of couldn't function in that way. So the Breita is saying that a doctor, along with several other professions, they're not liable for damages they cause accidentally if they're duly licensed and practicing with the permission of the Beit Din. And there is a whole side topic I realized here as I put together the shir that maybe we can touch on another time about Jewish views about medical malpractice. But this is not a technical sort of halachic talk or a talk about what Judaism can teach us about contemporary policy. We're going to think more about what lessons we can draw from it, but it certainly is interesting to think about some of these sources in that light. And this idea is codified in the Shulchan Aruch in Yoreh De'ah, written in the 16th century by Rav Yosef Karo, living in Sfat. So he writes that nevertheless, one should not occupy himself with a medical treatment unless he is an expert, very much like the Ramban, and there's none other greater than he. For if not, he is regarded as one who sheds blood. If one administered medical treatment without the permission of the Beit Din, he is subject to payment of indemnities, even if he is an expert, and even if he is an expert. So the Machaber is writing here, Rav Yosef Karo is saying that even if someone is an expert, if they practice without the permission of the Beit Din, if they're not licensed in our contemporary language, then they cause damage, then they're obligated to pay the person they hurt back, just like anyone else. And let's continue. And it doesn't matter that they're an expert. The key thing here is you have to be an expert and licensed by the Beit Din. And if he administered medical treatment and had the permission of the Beit Din, the Jewish court, and erred, causing damage to the patient, he's exempt by the laws of man. So he's not owed, the Beit Din can't force him to pay any damages, but he's held responsible al yedei shemayim. He's held responsible by the laws of heaven. And if he caused someone to die and it became known to him that he'd acted inadvertently, he's banished on account from it. So if we think back to some of the parshiot that we read just a few weeks ago, we talk about the cities of refuge in those parshiot where someone who commits manslaughter is supposed to flee. So that's sort of the case that Rav Yosef Karo is saying here, that someone who, a physician, even one who's an expert and licensed by the court, if they inadvertently hurt someone, they're not held liable by an earthly court, but there's some sort of heavenly punishment that perhaps that hangs over them. And if they kill someone, they're not going to be punished by an earthly court, but they should flee, they should move, they should go somewhere else as a sort of sign perhaps of taking responsibility. But the key part here is that they're not held responsible by the earthly court. But perhaps this is who perhaps someone like this might go to Gehenna. And it meant which is quite striking because they seem to be doing everything right. They're an expert and they operated with the permission of the Beit Din. And in fact, many other achronim, many other contemporaries of the Shulchan Aruch disagreed with what he said here. So the Prisha, who's a slightly earlier commentator, writes that if one made a mistake and caused an injury, and this is specifically when the injury was caused inadvertently, for if it were on purpose, he would be liable. But if he erred while acting dutifully and caused a death, he's exempt from penalty by an earthly court, as well as the heavenly court. But it is clear in that case that God wished the patient to die. So that the Prisha and others say that if a doctor makes a mistake accidentally or acts correctly, let's say, and someone still gets injured or passes away, not only are they not liable in any sort of physical or material way, they're also not destined for Gehenna. They don't have to go anywhere. There's no judgment from heaven that's hanging over them that they have to atone for, that they did everything right. So it seems really that that this idea that Rashi suggests that doctors go to Gehenna because they kill people, that's only applying, according to the commentators, to a very certain type of person. One who is either not an expert, they think they're better than they are, or they're an expert, but they don't do what they're supposed to. They don't go to the Beit Din and act with permission of the Beit Din. They for some reason, they think they don't have to go to the Beit Din, maybe because they're an expert. Maybe that's what Tov Shebarofim means. That because they think highly of themselves, they don't go to the Beit Din, and those are the people who the Mishnah is speaking about as being destined for Gehenna. And if we look at we just looked at some of the more halachic works. If we look at some sort of the more of the commentators that focus more, let's say, on the moral message that we could take away from this Mishnah, we'll see that is what they hint at. So there are a couple different, a few of these commentators are interesting because of the insights they bring, even if they sort of take us off on slight tangents. I did want to share them with you. So Shlomo Ibn Virga, it was a physician who was born in Spain. He lived at the very end of the 15th century, early 16th century, right around the time in his life, and the Spanish expulsion happened during his lifetime. So he interprets this in a sort of allegorical way, that a physician should act as if Gehenna itself is open before him, if his treatment kills the patient. In this way, he will act with caution and diligence, and the best of physicians is one who acts as if he might one day inherit hell unless he is appropriately careful and attentive. So for Shlomo Ibn Virga, this Mishnah is totally meant as sort of allegorical way to tell doctors that they have to be very cautious when they're treating a patient, and think that if they do anything wrong, then they might be destined to Gehenna. Jumping ahead a few centuries, the Maharal, another thinker who comments extensively on Agadata, he writes that a physician who's not also an expert in God's Torah will view his subject as nothing but material beings. Therefore, he's destined for Gehenna. And there's no substance to Gehenna, only absence and evil. And because the material world has no potential and is only physical, and absence clings to it, and it is known that matter alone has no potential, matter without any spirituality has no potential, thus one who understands only nature, the physical reality which has no potential, he will go to Gehenna. So the Maharal, is a fascinating thinker, but he's very hard to categorize. He's a mystic, and even amongst Jewish mystics, he doesn't really connect to any other school of mysticism easily. It's very sort of, he is a school unto himself. So here also he is sort of an outlier in how he understands this teaching. He says though, but his point is that if a doctor sort of looks at a person narrowly, only in sort of a physical way, then they miss the bigger picture that's there. They don't understand the way God interacts with the person. They don't understand there's more there's more to a person than just their material being, that there's a soul there. And if they don't recognize that, then they're destined for Gehenna. the Maharsha, who's perhaps the one of the best known commentators on Agadata, also an Achron, I believe in the 17th century. He interprets this now more along the lines of, I think, where those halachic works we read were taking us. So he says, there is to explain that the best of doctors refers to those who hold themselves in such high regard and expertise of the doctors that there are none like him. So that when it says Tov Shebarofim, it means that this is a person who thinks they're better than anyone else. So he relies too much on his own experience because of his arrogance. And sometimes he will make a mistake, as is the natural way of things. And he will kill a sick person by trying to heal him with something that's bad for that person. And instead of relying too much on his own judgment, he should consult other doctors regarding things that could lead to death. So this is a person who thinks they're very good, and because they think they're very good, they don't consult with their colleagues. And the Tiferet Yisrael, a commentator on the Mishnah, also an Achron, says something very similar. He says that when the Mishnah says good doctors go to Gehenna, he writes, it appears to me that this is not meant to denigrate doctors. So the Ramban said it was meant to denigrate doctors, but the Tiferet Yisrael is living much later. He says it's not meant to denigrate doctors. Rather, though, it's to praise those doctors who are most skilled. It does not say, and how do we know this? He notices the language that the Mishnah uses. He says that the Mishnah says, Tov shebarofim leGehenna, that good doctors go to Gehenna. But unlike in the line afterwards where it talks about butchers, where it says that even a kosher butcher is a partner with a malek, he says it doesn't say that a kosher doctor goes to Gehenna. That it does not say a fit doctor as it does with butchers. So see from here, he writes, that good does not have the same connotation as fit. Only one who thinks of themselves as being very good and skilled is assigned to Gehenna, because they are arrogant and rely on their own judgment rather than consult with their colleagues. So the doctors who go to Gehenna because they kill people are those who are arrogant and don't consult with their colleagues, or who are arrogant, who don't consult with the Beit Din, who think that they're better than they really are. Now, because this is a Shabbat Shuva Drasha, and we're all thinking about how we can change in the coming year, it's clear that one lesson is we shouldn't be arrogant. But I didn't have to give a whole drasha to say we shouldn't be arrogant, and we should also consult with others when we're unsure, and we should be humble. I think that's obvious to everyone. But the second interesting piece then is, well, if the message here is that doctors shouldn't be arrogant, how can you penalize them for restraining themselves? Why does Rashi and the Meiri also say, especially the Meiri, why does the Meiri say that doctors go to Gehenna because they don't intervene? It sounds like they go to Gehenna because they're not arrogant, because they're not overconfident, because they're too humble. So let's look at what the Torah says. So the Torah writes that it was taught in the school of Rabbi Yishmael that, and the words, and you shall surely heal, give permission. And that's a quote from the Torah. Give permission for a physician to treat a patient. So there's some discussion in the Gemara in different places about whether or not medicine is something that Jews should be involved with, actually, because maybe, according to some opinions in the Gemara, that God sort of sets up the world the way He wants it, and we shouldn't use medicine. We should just pray for mercy if someone gets sick. And ultimately, I think those opinions are in the minority. But that idea is there. And the way that opinion is rebutted is by quoting these words from the Torah, that you shall surely heal. And this is understood by many of the Tanaim and the Amoraim, that this is sort of the Torah and God giving people permission to treat illness. And one should not say, but one who has this skill should not say, what do I have this sorrow for? Perhaps I will make a mistake and find that I've killed someone. So one who has the ability to heal someone, who has the ability to make someone better, but also, of course, there's a risk there. because there's a risk in almost everything we do, but certainly in life or death situations. They shouldn't say, if they have that ability, why me, God? Why do you afflict me with this skill? Why did you put me in this position where I might make a mistake? Rather, one should be careful, as is fitting, in a case of where there is risk to life. And let him not say God is causing the illness and I'm healing it. So he shouldn't be haughty either and arrogant. This is not the correct approach either. Rather, it is like it is said, and this is a quote from Nach, in his disease he sought not the Lord but the physicians, because physicians, as we have learned, have been given permission to heal. And this is a great mitzvah. And it is the way to save lives. And one who rushes to do so is praiseworthy. However, one who is able to heal and refrains from doing so, it is as if he has shed blood. Right? We saw before that that many of the sources said that one who practices, even though they're not skilled, or practices without permission of the Beit Din, even if they are skilled, they're considered like one who has shed blood. But here it's saying one who, here in this halachic work, it's saying one who has the ability to heal, but refrains from doing so, it's as if he has shed blood. And this is the case, even if there are others who are also able to heal. Because, and there's a quote from the Yerushalmi that not from everyone does one merit to be healed. If one who is capable of healing does not engage in this practice, it is as if he has shed blood and he is destined for Gehenna. So one who has this ability, this gift, this skill, and they don't share it, they don't bring it to the world, they don't take care of someone who's in front of them, then they are destined for Gehenna because they refrain, because they didn't intervene, because they didn't use something that God had given them. And the Birchei Yosef, a later commentator, I think draws this out in an interesting way, in an interesting case. He says that it's forbidden, I apologize for the small Rashi script, I couldn't find a better copy of the Birchei Yosef, but it's forbidden for a doctor to abstain from healing a patient when he is cold, and he is not allowed to extricate himself from this situation. So if a person is called to help someone, they can't abstain, and they can't sort of remove that burden from themselves. And even if there's one equal to him, he must try to heal the patient. Even if there is not one as capable as him, but he abstains because he is afraid and does not want to make a mistake, it is possible that this is permitted. So that if you're worried that you're going to make a mistake, then maybe it's permitted for you to restrain, to not intervene. However, there are times he may be obligated to do so, even in such a case. So the Birchei Yosef says that even if you're afraid you're going to make a mistake, even if you're not sure how your intervention is going to go, there might actually be times where you still have to intervene. And then he concludes saying it depends on each patient. So whether or not you're obligated to intervene, if you're afraid of making a mistake, that depends on the case in front of you. So the people who go to Gehenna, the Meiri said some doctors go to Gehenna because they don't intervene. Those are people who refrain, who have a gift, who have a skill, and don't bring it to the world, don't share it to the world, and don't practice. So where does that leave us? So often we think about change in sort of specific moments, I think, that we regret. Moments we wish we could do over, where there were family, friends, other people that we have, or certain personality traits. We don't want to be as short-tempered or something like that. But, or we don't want to be as arrogant. And I think that's part of this here, right? One message was, don't be arrogant. But the other message here, the other reason the Mishnah says, Tov shebarofim leGehenna, is because if you are good, there might be a tendency to be nervous about what that gift is that you have to share. The Mishnah is talking about doctors, but it's not just doctors, because we all have certain qualities that we're good at, or insights that only we possess, things that only we can bring to the world and share with others. And there's a tendency to be nervous about that. How is that going to be received? Is it really going to make the impact that we want it to make? Are we really going to be able to affect people or the situation the way we want to? And because we're nervous, we oftentimes hold back. But by doing so, we deprive the world of a gift that we have that we can share. And in the case of doctors, the Mishnah says that's why that's why the Mishnah thinks they're destined for Gehenna. But that also applies to all of us. If we restrained this past year, when there was something that we should have shared, when there was a situation that called for our insight, or a gift that we had, that's something that in some way we're liable for, because we could have made a difference in the world. And as we think about the changes we want to make, let's also think about the ways in which we want to open up to the world, and how we can give more to the world, and how we can bring more of ourselves and more of our gifts to the world, and especially to those around us. So I want to wish each and every one of you a Shana Tova again, and a Gemar Chatima Tova.